results of that through the presentation, but there was much less published research, if you will, than I anticipated. There is a lot of work in the agricultural community, you know, in regards to protecting your crops and other mitigation factors, and also some climate change stuff that I'm going to get into as well. But not really as much as I thought I would find. But there were a few little tidbits I think will be useful. So before I get into some of the things that I found, I wanted to show that, you know, first of all, we care about frost and freeze because it can have significant impacts. It was interesting, if you look at a lot of the agricultural publications, there's some pretty strong statements in a lot of the citrus publications, et cetera, that say this is the #1 weather-related cost impact thing ever. But when you look at the meteorological publications, it's not as clear cut as that. But regardless, one of the biggest ones that we've had is March 2017, which was a $1 billion, had $1 billion impact, 1.1, excuse me. And this is from the NCDC report on billion-dollar weather-related disasters in the USA since 1980. And this one hits home because it occurred in the Southeast. You know, you hear a lot about California and Florida. There was an event, gosh, I believe in maybe 2008, 2009, that did like $400 million of damage just in one county in California. But this one right here, March 2017, definitely hits home. That included North and South Carolina with over $1 billion in damage. So some of the initial studies I looked at, they're
Mark, I just lost your audio. Hello, Mark.
Hold on.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Use the start at the beginning of this slide, I think. The Frost 101 one.
Okay, I'm not sure what that. Yeah, so a lot of the research goes over some just fundamental stuff, and this is nothing new to meteorologists. We all know about this stuff. There's two types of frost. One is radiation, what we typically get, clear nights, light winds, nighttime temps of 33 to 36, usually much warmer during the day. And then the other type is advection. You usually hear about advection freezes more than advection frost. And this is, you know, obviously when you just get a different air mass that moves in and leads to typically below normal or below freezing temperatures all day long. It's often associated with windy but very cold temperatures and also much less of an inversion. Wanted to highlight these two figures over here on the left. This first one is from, actually both of these are from citrusresearch.org. This top one is interesting because it shows the time in hours in relation to the percent damage of fruit that occurs with cold temperatures below freezing. And one of the themes that I came across in the research is that about an hour or less, not a whole lot of damage, but there's an exponential increase in problems, if you will, once you get from about 2 to 4 hours of below freezing temperatures at the ground. So that's really important for us to think about operationally. Especially when we get above 3 or 4 hours, it can really do a significant amount of damage to crops and fruit in particular. The bottom image, again, nothing new, just showing the typical temperature profiles for radiation frost on the right and the red where you've got a significant inversion. And again, our typical thermometers, gosh, I guess 1.5 meters is the standard WMO height for a thermometer. Right about here where my mouse is, I don't know if you can see it, but, you know, obviously, you know, fundamental stuff. If the temperature is above freezing at the thermometer height, it can be well below freezing right at the ground level, depending on things like soil and plant canopy moisture and things like that I'm going to get into in a minute. Moving right along, you know, one of the things that you know, everybody said was, okay, frost occurs when the temperatures near the ground are below freezing, regardless of what the thermometer temperature above ground is, and relative humidity values approach 100% near the ground. And there's really interesting studies that I have in a few slides that show just the exact impact of frost based on relative humidity. I think that's probably one of the key slides of this presentation. All right, moving right along. Can you still hear me, Reed?
Yes.
Okay. So a lot of the agricultural publications that I came across, they definitely reference the National Weather Service as the authoritative voice in temperatures and frost advisories, freeze warnings, etc. And they actually recommend folks that, look, if you've got a vested interest in crops or any kind of growing, by all means, go to the National Weather Service. That's a common theme. However, farmers are definitely using their own stuff to come up with, to protect their own livelihood. Even to the point where they've come up with their own diurnal curves. That's what this map is here, based on the sunset hour and the minimum temperature forecast. They're actually recommending something like this for a diurnal curve, so you can calculate again the exact number of hours that your fruit or your plant canopy, if you will be below freezing. And and I relate this to surfing a lot too. It's like, regardless of what any surf forecast tells me, and I respect all the experts out there. I know that if it's 3 to 6 feet at 7 to 9 seconds, that's when I can do everything I can to get in the water. I don't care what anybody else tells me. And I, kind of come up with these things based on bathymetry or whatever. Farmers are doing the same thing. Like they respect us, they listen to us, but they're doing their own deal to protect their own livelihood for sure. So I've got a little video here, and I'll get to it in a minute, but this is from an Australian PhD talking about the moisture on plant canopies. And I think that's one of our big opportunities to look at is moisture on a plant canopy. If we can figure that out, I think it could be a big impact to our local tools. But just getting into more of the 101, clear nights are important because obviously they allow thermal radiation from the soil to escape into space. The rate of cooling and final temperature of the plant canopy is determined really by the soil types. A darker, heavier soil with some moisture is going to transmit more energy to the plant canopy, so that's going to keep it a little bit warmer, right? But the lighter, sandier soils like we have here in the Carolinas tend to lead to more frost event because of the radiation balance. Agricultural community, they're going to do a lot to protect their yield. They're going to put trees up, they're going to put fences up, they're going to do other landscape features, they're going to put plants on slopes, whatever they can do to mitigate cold pools, which tend to sink and gather in very low-lying areas. And they're going to do all kinds of stuff to mitigate that. But you get to a point where temperature is going to win out. If it's really cold, it's really hard to prevent that. So I wanted to play this video. I think it's 2.5 to 3 minutes, and maybe I'm going to try to maximize it here too. Stand by. Okay. Right.
Frost can affect your crop at all stages of development.
Can you guys hear that before I keep playing it?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna keep playing it.
Hello there, this is Justin Varghese again, joining you from New York City. I will be the course moderator for this course.
That's the long video. Hold on, I don't know what happened. There we go. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry guys. We don't want AI. There we go.
Frost can affect your crop at all stages of development, reducing yield and quality. Here, Dr. Ben Biddulph, Research Officer with DAFWA, explains how a frost occurs and the contributing environmental factors that will determine severity.
When we have a wet canopy, we get a lot more frost damage than if the canopy was dry, and there's two main reasons because of this. One is because of the wetness, the actual water, and the other is because of the ice nucleators, which happen in that. So frost is not just freezing damage. There's three main processes which happen with frost. The first two are cold and desiccation. In most of our frost events, that's what we get. So the cold is basically that temperature response, so the diurnal stress of actually going from quite a warm daytime temperature to a low overnight minimum, and then back up to a warm temperature following a frost event. So that cold effect, essentially, the plants have to change their membrane fluidity and their energy balance and the processes around that just to cope with that cold stress. So frost initially has that effect of cold. The next effect is desiccation. So when we get a frost event, we get ice. The dew forms on the canopy, and then that dew freezes. After that, it then starts to suck water out of the air, and so it will freeze water from out of the air, but then it will also start to freeze water out of the plant mesophyll cells and out through the stomata itself. So it'll actually start to desiccate the plant tissue and the flag leaf tissue. And quite often after a frost event, you can go out in the morning, and when you see the flag leaves defrost, you'll see them wilt as well. That's because they've lost all of that water from out inside the tissue to the outside. So there's a desiccation effect. So there's these first two processes, and we get that for most frost events. The other effect we get is ice formation and freezing damage. Now, plants of wheat will normally supercool to about -10 degrees out in the paddock, but when we add ice nucleators, they'll start to freeze at warmer temperatures. Now, ice nucleators are just like, when you leave your beer in the freezer and you forget to take it out. When you first take it out, if you don't bang it hard or you don't open it, the beer won't freeze. But as soon as you open, they'll break that seal. It'll freeze straight away, and that's because you basically had an ice nucleator come in there. Same thing happens with your wheat out in the paddock. Essentially, when it's at -10 degrees or -4 or 5 degrees, it'll supercool down to those temperatures and the plant tissue won't freeze. So you only get cold and desiccation effects. What happens with ice nucleators, they'll actually make your canopy freeze at warmer temperatures. So normally in the paddock, we do have ice nucleators in the form of dust and different bacterial spores on the canopy, and these normally raise the freezing point of those canopies to around -5 degrees. But when we have a rainfall event which goes through and actually wets the canopy, those rain droplets also bring in with them ice nucleators. And so a lot of those ice nucleators which come with that rainfall event raise the freezing point to around -2. So when we have a wet canopy with a lot of these ice nucleators which have been introduced,
Did it freeze?
a dry
It
frost,
froze for me.
a wet canopy always does.
Oh, there it goes.
Okay, let me replay it.
Damage.
Almost over. It was over. So sorry about the technical difficulties, but the main theme there was the wetness of the plant canopy can be a significant factor in frost and freeze damage, especially because it's got more ice nuclei.
Hello there, this is Jaslin Varkis again, joining you from New York City.
Let me go to the
I will
next
be the
slide.
course moderator for this course, Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development,
All right, guys.
Part 3. If you have already watched Part 1 and 2 of the series, you don't need an introduction.
All right, I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it must be Apple's computers.
Yeah, it must be my Mac issues, but yeah, the theme of that video was the moisture on a plant canopy can make things freeze at much warmer temperatures. So this was actually the most interesting study I came across from Elisa and Al Zagul in 2012. This was actually a study for refrigerants to look at airflow through air conditioners and compressors and things like that, because the frost thickness is going to really impact airflow. And if you get to a frost thickness of a certain point, it's going to prevent air from circulating, and it can do problems. So, but it's valuable for us in that it really looked at different humidity values and frost thickness values is a function here on the graph that is frost thickness on the y-axis, operation time of the evaporator coil and the x-axis, and most importantly, the relative humidity values are the colors. You've got 70% in blue, 80% in green, and 88% in red. And essentially what I saw here was the key points of this paper was that, first of all, there is basically an exponential increase in frost thickness between 2 and 4 hours, and you could almost argue between 2 and 6 hours. But even more important is that once you get above relative humidity values of especially 80%, the thickness really jumps up. So that those relative humidities above 70%, especially above 80%, and anything after about 2 hours below freezing, you really start to get problems with frost. And the good news is our frost tool kind of accounts for this. And I think that the low end is 75% humidity, but you really get problems above, gosh, 80% RH, and once it's, you've been exposed to freezing temperatures more than about 2 hours. So this was really interesting to me, for sure. So the Bureau of Meteorology has quite a bit of Frost 101 stuff, if you will, and I just put this on here because they actually use 39 degrees Fahrenheit or less than 4C as their indicator for frost. The Weather Service obviously uses 33 to 36 based on Directive 10-515, but it was interesting they use slightly warmer temperatures. And the other thing I thought was interesting is they actually produce frost forecasts out 7 days every 3 hours because of the impacts it has across their nation, in particular to the wheat yield across the country in their spring, which is our fall. This is just an example of one of their frost potential products. You can see that there's some potential down there towards Tasmania in the southeast part of Australia. And I'm sure Terry remembers some of the geography better than I do on that last image.
I think that was New South Wales.
New South Wales, there you go, there you go. So the next couple of slides, and I'm getting close to the end here, are related to climate change. There's a lot of investments being made across Australia to look at, okay, are the number of frost days going down? Are they going up as we get a warming planet? And the same thing, are the last frost days, is it getting earlier because of a warming planet, or is it getting later? But they're really interested because on average it leads somewhere around, gosh, $450 million Australian dollars in damage each year. And again, I wanted to highlight that one California county that had about that much in one event in 2007. They're particularly concerned with spring frost, again, which is our fall, typically around September is their biggest problems with the wheat yield in particular. But they're, again, really putting a lot of dollars behind, okay, is climate change leading to earlier blooming or heading time in the spring? And also, is drought leading to more clear nights? Obviously they've had a lot of problems with drought recently, as was amplified by the recent wildfire activity that occurred last winter, our time, their summer. One of the studies in this Zing et al. Paper showed that they actually, I guess it was part of the southwest part of Australia, has seen a 20% increase in frost since 1957, which was counterintuitive to a warming planet. I think some of this could be elevation based, maybe some places that were really, really cold and well below freezing and not really getting a lot of frost, or are now getting frost. They didn't really have a great conclusion for it, but they did say it could be related to elevation. But they did see a 20% increase in some areas that do have significant agriculture, so they're recommending, again, much more investment to be made into understanding this and how it could impact their nation's economy. They are definitely recommending that more investments go into genetic variations of seeds that can withstand frost, and that was part of both of these research articles, was that we need to invest in that. And again, I know that's not a popular thing with a lot of people, but they do see some threats to long-term yields based on climate change. So another note on climate change, this is from a paper from Faust and Herbold in 2018, and I'll just read this here. There are very clear indications that climate change is bringing forward both the start of the vegetation period and the date of the last spring frost. Whether the spring frost hazard increases or decreases with climate change depends on which of these two occurs earlier. There's a race between these two processes. If the vegetation period in any given region begins earlier compared to the date of the last spring frost, then the hazard will increase over the long term. If the opposite is the case, the hazard diminishes. In this graph here, it actually shows an increasing threat. This is just a simulation out to 2080 or 2100, where it actually shows the beginning of the apple flowering occurring earlier than the average date of the last frost, which again would lead to an increasing threat over the long term. But obviously a lot of uncertainty in that. So a few final thoughts. I would be very surprised if, some of the work that Tim has done on our climate webpage isn't getting much more use than we anticipate. I think there's probably some opportunities there to curate that data of long-term frost and freeze information. And I know we've already done some of that, but I bet it's very, very valuable to a lot of our community that's in the growing community. This is just a question I'll throw out there. Are there any ways that we can better incorporate canopy moisture into some of our tools, or even a proxy for that from recent rainfall? I do not have the answer for that. I'm just putting it out there. The other thing I came across a lot was, the impact of latent heat release. If you get really high relative humidity values, at some point that's going to turn to a liquid and lead to a little bit of warming. How does that impact things? I don't have a good answer for that. And a couple final thoughts here. It's often good to err towards the side of caution, because significant impacts can occur with frost, especially in the spring. However, there's a lot of money going on in preventative measures. I came across a lot of research related to people using heaters, using fans to blow down air from the top of the inversion, or just above the inversion down to the surface to mix the temperatures up a bit. Irrigation, a lot of money going into irrigation because freezing can insulate crops. Row covers is common in the Carolinas. That's what an image of this here on the left of a row cover over strawberry plants. And also some chemicals are being sprayed on plants as well that are able to withstand frost. So again, if you err too far towards the side of caution, it also has a cost, because people are going out and protecting their crops if they think there's going to be a frost event. And I'm really looking forward to, after COVID restrictions ease, to getting out in the field and doing more partner relations and getting more input from them to help continue to evolve this program in the future. And this is the last slide, and this will be here before we know it, folks. This is the climatological date of the median last freeze, which here is typically sometime in March. And that's it. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, the question I would have here, and I imagine Tim would be maybe but Tim probably. Have we seen similar things here with the as that study showed, where the threat of the frost has extended in time?
Yeah, I don't know. It would be a really fun thing to look at, though, and I bet it would be very interesting to a lot of our community.